time for us to check back in with the family history and stories of Opal Corn Myers. If you missed any of the previous readings, just look in the description below for a playlist. And also you can look in that description, that very first line, to see where you can purchase this wonderful, wonderful book. Starting school, August 1919 to August 1920. My first trip to town. My life was a mixture of carefree moments and tough times. You'll go through the same thing, Lori, but never give up. Giving up isn't in your blood. My Grandpa Hall proved that. As he got older, farming became more and more difficult for him. Finally, about 4 years after we moved into the cabin down from the mission, he decided to get a job in town at the cannon factory. He traded his big farm up on the creek for 2 houses in Eastport, where they moved and lived in the first house after you crossed the railroad bridge. Grandpa worked as a night watchman at Stokely's, and Grandma worked there too, peeling tomatoes by hand. It's funny, Grandpa would let Grandma work at the cannery, but he still wouldn't let her wash dishes or clean house. They always kept a woman in their home to do those things. Grandpa had promised me that as soon as they got settled in, I could come down to town to visit with them for a week. He talked about all the stores in Newport and how he wanted to take me to see them and get me something store-bought. He said he would take me to the place where he worked and show me all around. When I was 8 years old, towards the end of the summer, my Grandma Hall came to get me. She spent the night at our place, and fairly early the next morning we started our trek across the mountain and down to the railroad tracks. There we saw Miss Ricky Norton walking down the tracks toward us from Del Rio, where she had gone to pick up a few supplies. Miss Ricky was an old woman that Grandma had known for years but hadn't seen for some time. Grandma was troubled about her being out by herself, just walking down the railroad tracks like that. So we waited for her to catch up with us so we could walk with her up to where she would head back up towards her cabin. Walking down the train tracks obviously unnerved Miss Ricky something awful. Every once in a while, Miss Ricky would get down on all fours, put her ear on the track, and make a series of strange faces as she listened. Then, when she was satisfied that everything was safe, we would continue down the track. One time when Miss Ricky checked the track, she jumped up a-yelling, "Charity, Charity, we'd better be a-hurryin', 'cause that train's a-comin'. We better get to a big wide place and get off the track so a door won't fly open and hit us." It seemed like when I was little, people were always afraid of train doors coming open. Miss Ricky was a little more settled when we reached her cutoff place, but I remember thinking, what a strange person this one is. Grandma and I walked the tracks to the underpass going into Newport before we got off and started walking on the road. I wasn't all that far from our cabin, but already things looked different than what I had left back home, even the road. It was much smoother. There were no big rocks sticking out in the middle of it, or deep ruts to keep the wagon wheels in. We hadn't gone far at all down that road when I heard something loud coming up behind us. I looked back and saw this thing that looked something like a wagon, but it was horseless. Nothing was pulling it at all. I'd seen pictures of cars, and I knew what it was, but seeing that car come up behind us, coming straight at us like that, scared me nearly to death. I started to run away from it, but Grandma grabbed my arm. The driver was some fancy man that Grandma knew. He stopped and Grandma went to talk to him, but I stayed back as far away from the car as possible. "I'm sorry, Miss Charity. I didn't mean to scare the young'un there like that." Grandma told him about it being my first time in town, or anywhere else for that matter. I don't know what else they talked about, but a few minutes later Grandma yelled to me, "Come here, Opal, and get in. We got us a ride to the house. Come here, Opal, we're gonna ride." "Ride in that?" "Yes, come on and get in. It'll be fun, and when you get back home, you'll be able to tell everyone you rode in a car. Come on now, get in." I guess that man had wanted to make up for scaring me so badly when he came up behind us like that, but instead he ended up really terrifying me. My first experience in a car should have been fun and exciting. Well, for sure it was exciting, but not the kind of excitement I wanted. I was so scared and held on so tight my fingers went numb. I don't even remember when we got to Grandma's house that day. Don't remember much at all about that ride, only how scared I was. My grandparents' house was big, not as big as the mission house, but compared to our little one-room cabin with its lean-to kitchen, Grandpa's house was grand. It had plaster walls and ceilings like the mission house had, and in the kitchen, Grandma could pump water right into the house. That night, I was so tired that I could hardly eat. It had been a big day for me, and I guess the excitement of all those first-time evers in one day wore me out. It was the first time ever that I had been more than 3 or 4 miles from home, my first time ever going to town, my first time ever to ride in a car, and my first time ever to sleep in a big bed in a room all by myself. As soon as I put my head down on my pillow, my eyes closed and I was asleep. But the excitement of my first day away from home was not over. During the night, a horrible loud noise woke me up. At first I was so startled and befuddled. I couldn't think of where I was or what that noise could possibly be. I came out from under those covers so fast and jumped up and down on the bed screaming until Grandpa came into my room and assured me that I would be all right. "Nothing's wrong, little cougar. That's just the train going by. Does that every night at this time." When I calmed down, I remembered seeing the train track next to Grandpa's house, and it all made sense. I didn't sleep through one single night the whole week I was there. Every night I woke up because of the loud noise and vibrations that rattled the dishes and shook the house. To me, it sounded like that train had cut loose from the tracks and was coming right through the kitchen. It sounded exactly like that, and I never did get used to that train. The next morning, it seemed that Grandpa was nearly as excited as I was about going into town. "First thing, I want to take you by the cannon factory where I work. I told 'em all you was a-comin' for a visit, and I want 'em all to see my little cougar." When we got to the factory, the first thing I saw was this great big barrel, as big as a house. That's where they make kraut. He took me up some ladder-like stairs to a place where I could look down inside that big old barrel. I couldn't believe my eyes. There was a man in hip boots down in there with some kind of a fork pitching kraut out onto a tube to be canned. I thought that was the dirtiest, nastiest looking thing I had ever seen. That man standing in the food they were going to sell for people to eat. Of course it wasn't. Everything had been disinfected, but I couldn't imagine eating kraut coming out of a big old barrel like that. After he introduced his little cougar real proud-like to everyone he could find, he said, "Come on, little cougar, let me show you what a town is." We walked on down the street. It wasn't far into town. Everything seemed so foreign to me. The stores were wonderful. I had never imagined that there were so many things for people to buy. Grandpa took me into one store that had tables and a counter with stools in front of it. He boosted me up on one of those stools and told the lady behind the counter, "Give us 2 of them strawberry sodies. This is really tasty stuff, little cougar. You'll like it." He handed me one of the bottles. I remembered the chapel women warning us about drinking stuff out of a bottle, but of course they were talking about drinks associated with liquor. I knew there was no way in the world that my grandpa would ever give me anything like that, so I took the bottle. I held it out in my hand and watched the tiny bubbles in the reddish liquid fizzle to the top. It was right pretty. I'd never seen a drink in a bottle before. We didn't have Cokes or anything like that back in the mountains. Not knowing for sure how to drink out of the bottle, I watched as Grandpa put the bottle to his lips. I wanted to be sure I didn't spill any, so instead of putting the opening of the bottle up to my lips like Grandpa did, I put the whole end of the bottle neck into my mouth, resting it on my tongue and closed my lips around it. Then I threw my head back to take a big swallow. I don't know what happened. That pretty red liquid shot down my throat with such force and then just exploded back up into my mouth. It made me cough, and that in turn caused the soda to back right up through my nose and fly out all over me and Grandpa and the counter. My nose and throat burned so, I couldn't stand that stuff. As I spit out the rest, I thought that was the end of that new experience, but it wasn't. Before the soda hit the floor, I let out a burp that made my face turn almost the identical shade as the drink. It tasted even worse than when I first swallowed it. Just like the soda Mama made me drink sometimes when I was sick. I thought that it was the most terrible tasting stuff there ever was. Those chapel women for sure knew what they were talking about. Nothing comes out of a bottle was fit to drink. Well, that was the end of my drinking. I never did drink anything else out of a bottle, not till this very day. My visit to Grandma and Grandpa's was truly a wonderment for me. There were so many things I had never seen before, like the spigot in the yard where the water would come out, and I had never in my life seen electric lights or heard anything about them. Grandma and Grandpa didn't have electric lights in their home. They used lamps like we did. I hadn't noticed any electric lights or street lamps in town either. That's probably because we were there during the daytime. The second night I was there, I noticed the street lamp at the bridge down from Grandpa's. Of course, I didn't know it was electric, but I was amazed. How could someone get up that high and light it? I started watching for the man to come so I could see how he climbed all the way up that pole, but I could never catch him at it. Somehow I was always looking at something else when he came. So on my last night at Grandpa's, I decided I would go outside and watch that lamp pole and nothing else until the man climbed up there and lit it. Guess Grandpa noticed me going out, and after a little while he came out to check on me. He saw me standing there staring up at that pole. "What you watching there, little cougar?" "I'm watching for the man to come light that lamp. I've missed him every night, but I'm catching him for sure tonight." "Why, cougar, there ain't no man coming. They turned that light on from uptown." "They don't neither. You know good and well they can't turn that light on from way up there in town." "They do. You just keep watching, little cougar, and you'll see when they turn it on." We kept on watching together, and sure enough, that light came on all by itself. Grandpa told me that the power to light the street lamp came through the wires that went into street light. I couldn't understand that at all, and I don't guess I saw electric lights again until I went away to boarding school for my 8th grade. The next day, after I'd been at Grandpa's a week, Mama, who was at that time 6 or 7 months pregnant, came to take me home on the train. When we got to our stop, the conductor went to the steps and helped Mama down first. When he reached both of his arms up to get a hold of me and lift me down, I saw that he was a black man, and I was afraid of him, just like I'd been afraid of Dr. Branch. I jumped clean over the steps and landed where Mama was standing. She laughed at me about being afraid, but I really was afraid. Guess at that time in my life there were 2 things I just couldn't comprehend: how fire could come through a wire to light the street lamp, and why people came in different colors. From the whistle stop, we only had to walk 3 miles up the mountain to get home. Mama's Pellagra. Mama's name was Flora Louise, but everyone called her Flora Louise. She was a petite, beautiful woman. Mama never did weigh much, and at only about 5'3" or 4 inches tall, she looked so little standing by Papa, who was such a great big old man. Mama was not a real healthy woman. She had what they called pellagra, a nutritional disease, and was a semi-invalid for years. I don't know when she got sick, but she was sickly when I was real small, as far back as I can remember. Sometimes she would be up and around, almost like there was nothing wrong with her. On those good days, she would do the milking and work with her flowers, and sometimes we were able to go on long walks with her. Mama taught us well by both instruction and by example. We all knew how to work at home and how to be a good neighbor. Mama was a quiet woman and never talked much. Sure makes you wonder where we all got our tongues. She never went anywhere just to visit or to be sociable, but if there was a sickness, you could count on Mama being there to help. She was always quick to do whatever she could. She would do anything in the world for us or anyone else who needed her help. I saw her go to the homes of sick people, wash them, and do all kinds of things for them when she was sick herself. I just don't know if you could get a neighbor to do anything like that for you nowadays. Usually when Mama wasn't needed to help the sick, she would just sit right there at home sewing or something. She would go to church with us when she was able. Of course, Papa went all the time, just like Grandpa Corn. We knew we had to get ready to go, and for sure we had sure better be ready and starting up the road when that first bell rang at 9:30. Nobody asked us if we wanted to go to church. Nobody told us to get ready either. We just knew. When Mama had bad spells, she would stay in bed, but she could tell us what needed to be done. Like most children back then, we had all been trained to cook and do most everything around the house, and we always tried to do the best we could for Mama. Even when Mama was feeling well, Papa still took care of her. He babied her, but she also watched out for him too. When Papa went out in the field to plow behind the horse or the mule, Mama would take an old quilt and some sewing and go with him. She didn't like Papa out in the field by himself. Plowing could be very dangerous. Accidents could happen easily. The plow blade could get hung under a root, causing the plow to suddenly shift and hit the person guiding it, or the blade could hit a rock and bounce that rock up and over the plow. Men were killed in accidents like that, just as they are today with tractors. That was one of the main reasons why women didn't do much plowing. It was too dangerous and took a lot of strength. When I was about 9 or 10, Mama's doctor started treating her with herbs, and it wasn't long before she was up and working in the garden and feeling much better. One of the herbs he used was bloodroot, which he crushed into a fine powder. He wrapped it in individual doses like BC powders, and Mama kept them in the clock. She had her last bad spell in 1927 or 28 when I was away at school. This was around the time that Grandma Corn died. Don't get Mama mad. Like I said, Mama was gentle and not easily upset, but if you did say something to make her mad, you had just better get out of the way. If she said no, that was it. And if you had any idea at all of what was good for you, you kept your mouth shut. We knew better than to argue with her, and when she closed her fist with her thumb out to the side and then with a quick jerk turned her thumb up, we knew she was really angry and we didn't bother her. Mama was awfully stern. She didn't take well to any foolishness. She was real strict on us and gave us a lot of whippings, not that we didn't deserve every one we got. There was none of this 1, 2, 3 stuff that a lot of mamas threaten their children with these days. Mama didn't even think of counting. She told us once, and that was a plenty. Mama wouldn't let us go anywhere new without first asking Papa. Go ask your Papa, she would say. Since she didn't get out much, she wasn't always sure what kind of a family our friends might have. Some people drank, and others were just plain mean. Neither Mama nor Papa were about to have us close to the likes of that. We'll stop right there. What an interesting part today. So amazing thinking about Opal going to town for her very, very first time and seeing all those amazing, amazing sights. I like the way this started though when she was talking about that. She's telling Lori that that's the way life is that it's full of carefree moments and tough times too. It's, as an adult, most of us know that, when you get to reach to adulthood, you realize, there's hard times too. Now, a lot of children realize there's hard times too and goes through things, but especially once you reach adulthood, you realize sometimes if you do have a really good childhood, you think, well, when I get to be an adult, it'll just be perfect, so I'll do whatever I want and whenever I want and all that. And it's not like that. We know that. But that's just life. That's just a fact. But I think there's a I think there's a comfort in that, knowing that there's bad times and that they're going to come to you. You know, you may have heard this old saying that says, especially as believers, you might hear it at church, is that if you're not in a valley right now, you're probably about to go in one. You know, it's hard times come to all people. And I think there's a comfort in that, though. I would rather know that that may be coming, and then that makes you value the good times, the comforting good times, better, because you know that bad time may be coming. And then I think it helps too to just know that that's the state of humanity. It's like that for all of us, to varying degrees, some worse, some better for some people. But I think there's a comfort in that, in understanding that life is hard. It's hard. There's hard parts of it, and there's hard things to get through. And I think sometimes today society, not we, but society maybe kind of glosses over that and maybe gives children a false hope that it's just all, you know, perfect, all strawberries and cream, and it's just really not. So I love that she's passing that on to her granddaughter and telling her, you know, it's full of both. It's wonderful. Life is wonderful, but it's full of those carefree moments, but it's also full of tough times. And then she goes on to tell her, and you can do this. You can get through it because you come from good people. So I like that. And then that first image of her and Grandma Corn, or not Grandma Corn, this is Grandma Hall walking on the train where they're going to go into town. I like that, and especially the older lady they meet that's really afraid of the train tracks. Now, where I live here in Brasstown, there's no train tracks. There is an old train. I mean, a train used to come to Murphy, not in many years, many years, but there is old train tracks, you know, around. And one of my friends, when I was growing up, her grandmother lived in town, and so the train tracks were pretty close to her house. And there was another one of our friends with us, and I can remember one time on Sunday that, I don't know, we were probably in middle school, maybe ninth grade, maybe as old as that, but we got on that train track and started walking, and we walked, and we walked, and we walked, and we walked. And one of the, you know, we got tired and got grouchy with each other, because then we had to walk all the way back, you know. That's the only time I've ever really walked on a train track. Now, when Miss Cindy lived in Black Mountain, of course, trains still run out through there, and you could hear them sometimes. And me and Corey and Katie always liked to see them just because it was a novelty, because we wasn't used to seeing them. And somehow, I don't remember if somebody told Katie that, or maybe even Miss Cindy did, but about how you can lay a penny on a train track and let the train run over it. And so one time when we'd visited her, the girls were older, and Katie begged me to do that. So I think Miss Cindy took us to like this place. It was in Swannanoa. Makes me wonder if it's even still there now after the flood. But it was right on the side of the road where it was easy to get to the train tracks. You kind of had to cross them to go down to another little, like a little, I think it was a nursery or something that was there. And so we let Katie get out, and she laid a penny on it. And then on the, I don't remember if it was the very next day, but pretty quickly it was time for us to go home. So on our way home early in the morning, I stopped there and let Katie get out, and she found a penny. Now, whether that was her penny or not, I don't know, but it had been run over, you know, it had been damaged. I know that's against the law. You're not supposed to do that. But anyway, those are my train stories. I have one more train story, though. Daddy told me, said that he could remember when he was a boy, him and his mother, it's just a sweet memory, it's nothing special, but him and his mother were in a church in Murphy, and the train come by there, and he could just this real vivid memory of, he was real little, but little enough like to stand up on the bench at church, and that the train was coming by, I guess, during the church service, but about his mother nudging him and just gently pointing out the window so he could see it, you know, trying not to disturb the church. And then he looked out the window and he could see the train coming, and it was just a sweet memory of his. Of course, in later years, he went on to ride trains and things like that way more. Like I've never rode a train, so he had experience with that too. And then we have that beautiful story, funny too, comical, of Opal seeing the car for the first time. And that's just so drastic for us to think about. Like, she knew it was something like a wagon, but where were the horses? And then she had heard about cars and seen pictures, so she figured out real quickly, oh, that's a car. But she was so scared of it. But, you know, if you'd never rode in a car, of course you would be scared of it. You know, I try to think like me, like what's the next thing? If it's a, you know, thinking about the Jetsons or something, if it's a car that flies through the air, I'd be terrified to get in it. I'd be like, it's not on the road. I want to be on the road, you know. So that was an interesting part, is just thinking about seeing all that through her eyes for the first time. And then the train, then she got startled again when the first night when the train, come through and near the house and shook it and all that, terrified her. And you'd think, well, why didn't the grandparents tell her? But they probably had become so accustomed to it that they didn't even think about it. It's like, you can probably think of stuff near where you live that you become so accustomed to hearing that you don't think about it. Some things that come to mind for me is, the nature sounds that I hear, I don't think about. Like katydids in the summer are loud, but I've heard them so often that sometimes I don't even realize. Each summer I want to know the very first night that the katydids start hollering, but I usually can't. And then I hear them. Suddenly I'm aware one night that I hear them, and I'm like, wonder how long they've been doing this, because I just block it out because it's such a part of my life. So you can probably think of things like that too. And that's probably how they were with the train, that they were just so used to it they didn't even think about telling her. And then the strawberry sody, that incident, bless her heart. She made the mistake of putting the whole bottle in her mouth. She should have just took a little. They should have told her, take a little sip. If you've never had like a carbonated beverage, though, that bubbliness, I'm sure that it would bother you. I of course, can't remember the first time I drank a carbonated drink when I was a kid. And but I remember for Corey and Katie, I don't really remember the first time, but I remember that Katie had an aversion to it, those bubbles. She didn't like it. She would not drink a carbonated drink. She wouldn't drink Coke. She wouldn't drink Sprite. I tried not to let them drink Cokes and stuff. You always think Sprite's better. I'm not sure it's any better, other than it's not caffeinated. But Corey would. She would never turn down a Sprite. She liked Sprites, is what she would, if we went somewhere or something, she would order a Sprite. But Katie wouldn't. And there was sometimes that, I'm thinking about church trips and stuff like that, where it would just have been better and easier if she had just drunk the Coke or the Sprite, but she would not. She couldn't. She said, I don't like the bubbles. She couldn't stand the bubbles. So maybe she had a similar incident to Opal there, maybe. And then her mother, the other thing is she talks about is that the only thing it could make her think of is when it come back up, when she, immediately burped it back up. She says that it reminded her of her mother giving her sody. Well, you may think, well, had she had sody? Because he's calling them strawberry sodies instead of strawberry soda. But sody was just baking soda. Pap and Granny call it sody. They called it that. It's baking soda, but sody. And then if you didn't know that, I'm sure you did, but you can take a little bit of baking soda, if you have an upset stomach, and it'll make you, as Pap would say, belch. It'll make you belch. So that was the sody part there. And then the other thing about the staying at the grandpa's was the lights, how she just couldn't understand. The only way she could understand light was if you lit it, if you lit the lamp. Granny and Pat both are old enough that when they were children, that's the light they had, was oil lamps. That's all they had, was oil lamps. And so I can imagine as a child who you'd always seen somebody strike a match and light the lamp, and then you see that big tall lamp, basically you're thinking, how did they get up there and light it? So I really love that part too. And then that the grandpa, said, let's sit here and watch, and you just watch, because she's like, no, Grandpa, they've got to light it. So that's just a beautiful story, isn't it? And then interesting with her talking about her mama and her papa, who wouldn't love the obvious love they had for each other? How he doted on her and treated her kind of like a baby and babied her, and sounds like she needed it because she was sick a lot. And from this point, looking back, you wonder, that is a nutritional, a disease, like her nutrition wasn't right. But then you wonder if women in those days had so many children just back to back to back. And being pregnant really takes it out of your body as a woman, it takes your resources. So you wonder if that was part of it. I don't know. Anyway, but that he really doted on her. And then, though, in turn, like, she would go with him when he plowed because she was worried about him. So she'd take a blanket and sit there and watch him, make sure he's okay. I think that is so precious. So precious. Reminds me of Pap and Granny. Reminds me of them, Pap and Granny. They would do stuff like that for each other. And then it reminds me of me and Matt, too. So I'm very blessed to have a good marriage like that, too. Oh, and interesting too, the other thing about her being sick was the bloodroot pills. Now, this is the time of the year, I'll be looking every day to see if I see my first little bloodroot blooms. I have it grows wild in my area, and I have some over the years that I've moved from the woods out here to my flower beds, so I know where to look, and it's a beautiful little plant. And it's interesting, when you dig it up, the roots it's not really red like blood, it's more of an orangey, but a reddish color. If you mash them or break even the stem, you can see a little bit, like poke it on your hand. And it's been used, I don't obviously here for medicinal things, but I've also heard it was used to dye things with. You'd have to have a whole lot of it, it seems like. But it's a neat little plant because the first thing that comes up is just the bloom. So it's just one straight, it's just like all of a sudden it'll be there. It's like a little daisy about that big, just straight up with little white petals, you know. It's just beautiful, just no leaves, nothing, just the bloom. And then pretty quickly, all those little petals will just fall off, leaving like a kind of a pointy stamen there in the middle. They'll just be laying around it like snow. And then the leaves come out after that. And the leaves are just as pretty as that little flower, and they get it like as big as my hand, but they're those that are, I don't know what the name of that is, lobed. Like they're not like they're just really interesting leaves. You've probably, if you watch my videos, you've probably seen me show them because I show them every year. But anyway, interesting that he give her it was powder, and she kept it in the clock in her little, like you think of if you've ever took a BC or a goody powder for a headache. So that was really interesting. And then the last thing I had wrote down was just that how, even though she was so quiet and didn't really socialize, her mother, how she went to help people, you know, and would even, she says, even wash them, like if they were sick, help them take a bath, and just do whatever they needed to do for them. And those are tough things to do if you've ever been a caregiver. Those are tough things, but Opal's mother just go out into the community, anybody that needed help, and she would do those things for them. So that's really beautiful. And then really just shows how we can be as humans. So she was like that, so given, you know, kind of sickly a little bit, but so given, and quiet. Didn't put up with no foolishness. No, she didn't want no foolishness. But then she would get really mad. You know, she had a temper. It sounds like it took a lot to get her, like maybe something just had to hit her the wrong way, that most of the time she's probably easygoing, but then she had that flare of a temper. You may have known people like that. There's some people like Katie and Matt who have a short fuse, and it doesn't take anything to set them off. And then there's people more like me and Corey who it takes a lot, but then when we get set off, then we're really upset, you know. So kind of interesting look at Opal's parents for sure. So I hope you enjoyed this part. Please leave a comment and tell me what you enjoyed most. And I hope you'll drop back by next Friday, because we got to see what happens to Opal next.